the army versus a paramilitary group fighting for power.
Fighting between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces has entered its fourth week.
Rival forces remain locked in a power struggle despite international calls for a ceasefire.
Hundreds of people are dead as a bloody battle for power rages on in Sudan.
Welcome to a new explosive episode of AKTK Geo. Today's topic will cover a nation which has seen armed conflicts, military coups, terrorism, a partition and a civil war. And no, we are not talking about our neighbor Pakistan. So buckle up your seatbelts because we are going to take a bumpy ride to the East Africa where we'll dig up the troubled past and the horrific present of a mineral-rich country named Sudan. Sudan was under the British-Egyptian rule from 1899 to 1955 until it became independent in the year 1956. The first coup in Sudan occurred in 1958, which was a self-coup, which means that the Prime Minister of Sudan himself orchestrated a coup against the civilian government, which was formed after the 1958 election in Sudan. After this, started a chain of various coups, some successful and some unsuccessful, which makes Sudan one of the most unstable countries in the world. Let us briefly look at few coups so that you can get an idea about the magnitude of political instability that the region has faced and still faces.
1969, Colonel Ghaffar Nimiri led a successful coup against the President Ismail al-Azhari. The democratic rule in Sudan ended with this coup and Nimiri ruled the country for next 16 years.
In 1971, there was a coup against Colonel Nimri by Major Hashim Alta. But it lasted only a few days and Colonel Nimri launched a counter coup and came back to power again.
1985, the Defense Minister and the Armed Force Commander-in-Chief Field Marshal Abdul Rahman Swar al-Dahab launched a coup against the Colonel Nimiri, which finally overthrew his government after 16 years. This also led to the formation of a democratically elected government in Sudan, which unfortunately lasted only 3 years.
In 1989, military officer Omar Bashir conducted a coup and took power. His rule lasted for 30 years until he was overthrown by the army in 2019. Civilian Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok took charge of the country and things were going smoothly until they were not.
2021, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, remember this name because he is at the center of what is going on in Sudan today, launched a coup and took control of the government. Currently, General Burhan is the supreme leader of Sudan.
We have only skimmed the tip of the iceberg with the above stats on the coup in Sudan. Research from the Center for Systematic Peace and Statista shows that there have been 35 coup attempts, including failed ones in Sudan's history. Here is a chart which shows the full picture. Now that you have a brief idea about the political unpredictability of Sudan, we will explore the partition of Sudan, which ties up to the current crisis the country faces. Here is a general knowledge question for you. Which is the youngest country in the world? And the answer, my friends, is South Sudan, which was created in 2011. Why was it created? What were the reasons and the prevailing conditions which led to this split? If you ask me for a one-word answer, the answer is religion. But the long answer is let's find out.
As mentioned earlier, Sudan was governed jointly by Egypt and the British. The Egyptians ruled the north and the British the south. This enabled a lot of Christian missionaries to be active in the southern part and led to the spread of Christianity over there, whereas the northern part was predominantly Islamic. After Sudan gained independence, the power structure was centralized in the north and the people of the South Sudan who were following the Christianity and traditional African belief systems were marginalized.
Omar Bashir, who was the president of Sudan from 1989 to 2019, he imposed hardline Islamist stance which did not endear him to the south. Moreover, President Bashir made a bid to control the oil and water resources of the south. Bottom line is that the people of South were alienated and the government did nothing to integrate them with the North. The region was neglected with no infrastructural development taking place.
The first Sudanese civil war took place between 1955 and 1972, and the South demanded more regional autonomy. It is estimated that around 5 lakh people were killed in those wars, and sadly, a peace agreement in 1972 failed to allay tensions between the North and the South.
The second Sudanese civil war took place between 1983 and 2005. It was fought between the Sudanese government and the Sudan's People Liberation Army. This war ended with a Nevasha agreement which led to a referendum in South Sudan whether it should become independent or not. 98.33% people voted in favor of independence and the youngest country of the world was born. It was estimated that around 2 million people died in the second civil war.
As all these political upheavals were going on in Sudan, two people were slowly rising through the ranks and becoming powerful. Little did they know that many years later, both will be at the center of a power tussle which will put Sudan into another crisis. The two people were General Dagalo and General Burhan. What is their history and why is their past so important to understand the explosive situation in Sudan? Let us find out.
General Dagalo and General Burhan both were instrumental in the 2019 coup and 2021 coup. They both worked together, maybe forcibly since both had common interests. But the thing to note is that the current clash between the two relates to the background from which they came. What were the circumstances which made them the people they are today?
General Dagalo is the nephew of a tribal chief and his family were camel traders. It was alleged that people attacked and killed his family of 60 members and looted all his money. This forced him to join Janjaweed, a militia group which was active in Chad and Darfur region. The then President Bashir was supplying arms to Janjaweed to help him quell the rebellion of non-Arab people in the Darfur region. The rebellion was extinguished in the most brutal way possible and an estimated 3 lakh people died. Human rights groups have accused Janjaweed of carrying out rapes, killings and torture of civilians.
Dagalo rose through the ranks and became a feared warlord. He caught the eyes of President Bashir, who recruited him as an enforcer. President Bashir formed the RSF to subdue Sudan's People Liberation Army and made General Dagalo its leader. President Bashir offered Dagalo full impunity, which encouraged him to capture gold mines, carry out atrocities, and in the process, he amassed considerable amount of wealth and power. Dagalo became a name to be feared, and when President Bashir lost the confidence of the people, Dagalo joined General Burhan in overthrowing President Bashir.
General Burhan, on the other hand, was a very low-key figure before 2019. He was also posted in Darfur during the 2000s, where he rose to a position of regional commander by 2008. It is said that he too was involved in the crushing of the Darfur rebellion, where 3 lakh people were killed and 2.7 million were displaced. He most probably had his first encounter with Dagalo in Darfur only.
Interesting thing to note is that President Bashir and top Sudanese officials were charged by International Criminal Court for the Darfur killings, but neither General Burhan nor General Dagalo were charged. In 2018, General Burhan became the Chief of Staff of Sudanese Army, and by 2019, he was the Inspector General of Army and Sudan's third most senior general. The 2019 coup brought General Burhan into the spotlight, and he has been the de facto leader ever since.
As you can see, one is an uneducated, battle-hardened warlord who rose up to the power and riches by his brutality, ruthlessness and cunning. Whereas the other is an educated army general who rose up the ranks through his grit, determination and hard work. One was fire and the other ice. Both polar opposites had one thing in common: the thirst for power. How this unquenchable thirst is destroying Sudan. What happened when these two faced each other in the deadly game of power? Let us investigate further.
General Burhan and General Dagalo, as I mentioned earlier, was at the heart of the coup of 2019, which had toppled Omar Bashir from power. In 2019, it was decided that Sudan will be led by a transitional government and the power will be shared between Transitional Military Council, which was known as TMC, and the Forces of Freedom and Change, FFC. The public had been promised that elections will be held in 2022, but as the famous saying goes, promises are meant to be broken.
In 2021, General Burhan and General Dagalo, they again came together and seized complete authority and power and dissolved the government. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok was placed under house arrest. General Burhan's reasoning for the coup was that he wanted to avoid a civil war in Sudan since the politicians were instigating the public against the military. He declared that a technocratic government would lead Sudan until the next elections in July 2023.
General Burhan proposed a plan to integrate the Rapid Support Forces (RSF) into the country's military, which did not go down well with the head of the RSF, General Dagalo. This is the sole reason for the countless civilian deaths and the destruction which is taking place as we speak in Sudan. General Dagalo and his RSF forces do not want to work under the army, whereas General Burhan wants to consolidate his power, and the only way to do that is to put General Dagalo under him.
The tensions between the two camps reached a boiling point in April 2015 when the RSF troops were deployed all across the country. The army considered this move as a threat, and no one really knows except the perpetrator that who fired the first shot. But the bottom line is fights broke out between the two camps, which led to deaths of more than 400 civilians, which is a WHO figure. The unofficial figures will be much higher.
The RSF is not as powerful as the army if you consider the numbers, but the strength of RSF is its mobility. So General Dagalo's strategy is to control the power centers of Sudan using the mobility of his RSF troops. He knows the army is not as mobile as his RSF, and if he takes the control of the power centers or manages to kill General Burhan, then the victory will be his. His forces are battle hardened and are more adaptable at guerrilla warfare when compared to General Burhan's army.
The RSF moved into the densely populated areas of Sudan, which forced the army to bomb these areas, resulting in civilian deaths. However, if the war persists, then the army would definitely beat the RSF forces because their numbers are larger and also they have access to much advanced artillery and fighter jets. So it makes sense that RSF is going for a quick win.
There is an old African saying, when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. The poor civilians are facing the brunt of this ego tussle, and these poor civilians comprises a lot of Indians too. Indian government has carried out evacuations from Ukraine and Kabul, but evacuating Indians from Sudan was a different ballgame altogether, since there is no government authority over there with whom the government could communicate. How did the government manage it? And is there a movie script hidden in one of the most daring operations carried out? Let us have a look.
India had launched the Operation Kaveri on 24th April to rescue Indian citizens stuck in Sudan. On 5th May, Operation Kaveri ended, and in total 3,862 people were evacuated from Sudan. There were 4 major problems facing the Indian government.
First, the war was happening on the streets of Khartoum and bullets do not differentiate between enemy and civilian.
Second, no contact was possible with the rebel leader or the current government.
Third, the Indians in Sudan were spread out and a lot of them did not have their passports since the passports needed to be surrendered to the employers.
Fourth, all bridges, roads, airports, etc. were either destroyed or under the control of rebels.
Seems mission impossible. But who needs Tom Cruise when we have our External Affairs Minister, Jai Shankar? So how was Mission Impossible made possible? Let us explore.
The Indian defense made a Google spreadsheet of all the Indians with their locations, contact numbers, landmarks, and other details. This spreadsheet was uploaded online and more than 3,000 people were registered. A war room was created at the Indian embassy in Khartoum and all the Indians were contacted. They were split into small groups and each group was assigned a leader who was an educated, tax-heavy person.
Air rescue was not possible because a Turkish plane had been shot at. So the plan was to transport all the Indians to the port of Sudan by bus, and from there they were transported to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. This was a journey of 850 kilometers by road. There were occasions when the bus had to move through war-ravaged areas and the local commanders were contacted to let these buses pass. Every bus had been assigned a leader and these leaders were keeping track of safe havens where food, shelter, water will be available in case of an emergency. All these were relayed to the war room in a real-time scenario. The buses even had to move through the areas of intense fighting, but all is well that ends well.
Sounds like a movie script, right? But what if I told you that this was not the movie script I was talking about, and there is another tale more fantastical than the one mentioned above? Sounds crazy, right? So without keeping any more suspense, let us bring to you the tale of Wadi Sayyidna rescue operation. There were 121 people who couldn't reach the port of Sudan, and the only way to rescue them was through air. The nearest airfield to Khartoum is the Wadi Sayyidna airfield, which is around 40 km north of Khartoum. The dilapidated airfield had no landing lights, navigational approach, aids or fuel, and this was the same airstrip where a Turkish plane was shot at. This operation was like directly going into a lion's lair. How was it executed?
Indian Air Force used the Hercules, our military transport aircraft which took off from Jeddah. As per the Indian Air Force, India's defense in Khartoum led the rescuing party to an airstrip. It was pitch black and the air crew used electro-optical sensors to ensure that the runway was free and the flight was landed under satellite guidance.
There were a few medical cases and also pregnant women among them. The takeoff was also carried using night vision goggles and the whole operation took about 2.5 hours.
If I have to sum up the Sudan conflict in one line, it will be this. It is a clash between two power-hungry people whose only motive is to stay in power. Only time will tell who wins this ego battle. But what we can tell surely now is that the losers are the poor people of Sudan. If you liked our video, please share it among your friends and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support us, please support us through Patreon. Thank you.